Thanks, Dr. Ivy, for the kind introduction. I'm Aryani Thipuriani Sajja. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at the University of Memphis, and I'm also a visiting scientist in the Department of Diagnostic Imaging at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. It's my great pleasure to give a seminar to students across Shelby County schools and also teachers and other guests who are attending this seminar. And as we have a broad range of audience, I had like a moderate level of information in this seminar, but if students are interested to know more or dig deeper, I'll provide resources towards the end of the presentation, which you can look into. And as I'm presenting, you can ask questions in the chat window, and my graduate student would be answering those questions as I'm presenting. And we'll have a last 10 minutes as a Q&A session, and you can ask me questions more. Okay, so with that, let's dive. So today I'm going to cover different medical imaging modalities, how they work, what is the science and principles behind how they work, and what are the technological advancements for each of these imaging techniques. And I'll also show you some images and clinical applications for each of these modalities. And I'll discuss some pros and cons of each of the modalities. And finally, I'll show what we do in our lab. Okay, to start with, so medical imaging is like capturing images like photos every day with your camera or phone. Right now with phone, we are capturing like thousands of images per day. So it's very similar. But how are images formed using a camera or a phone? So it's basically a reflection of light, right? So the light is reflected from our bodies, and that enters the lens of the camera, and it will be focused, and an image will be formed that's collected on the detectors. So what is the energy source that is used for forming these images? It's basically light, right? So now what is light? So light, or visible light as it's called, it's a part of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's a radiation that can be perceived by the human eye. So here, this is the visible spectrum that we can perceive with our eyes. So here we have the visible light. As you know, the visible light, these are the rainbow colors that are in the visible light, and these have different wavelengths. And as you go towards a shorter wavelengths, you have ultraviolet. And as you go to a longer wavelengths, you have infrared. And now what is this radiation? So radiation is basically energy that moves from one object in the space to another where it is being absorbed. So I said we use this light to take these images every day. So can we use this light to see also inside our body? Unfortunately not. Light cannot penetrate beyond the skin. So here, this is the visible spectrum, and here this shows the skin. And you can see from here that the visible light hardly penetrates the tissue. So it is actually stopped at the skin. And even it's the same with the ultraviolet, and the near infrared and infrared somewhat travel, but it's very limited. So what if we have some kind of energy that can penetrate the body like this? So we have some energy that penetrates the body, and whatever the signal we are getting is collected at this receptor, and then we can form the image. So I have talked about the visible light, and this is an electromagnetic spectrum which has several other types of radiations. So the highest energy is the ionizing energy, where we have X-rays and gamma rays, which are higher than the visible light. And we have energies that are lower, but have longer wavelengths. So those are the radio waves, microwaves. And electromagnetic waves, they have both electrical and magnetic properties, and they have synchronized oscillations of both electric and magnetic fields. So you can induce any of the fields by perturbing one of the opposite ones. And these waves are characterized by frequency, or you can express them in terms of energy or wavelength, which I'll just show. Okay, so this is our electromagnetic spectrum. So you have this is the visible light, which we just talked about. And as you go to the shorter wavelengths or the higher energy, so you have the X-rays and gamma rays. And as you go to the increasing wavelength or the shorter energy, Then you have infrared microwaves, which you use to heat the food, and radio waves like in TV or FM. And these different types of radiation can be characterized or can be expressed in terms of the photon energy. So you have this photon energy here, and if you know one of those, you can find the frequency or wavelength. And because through these equations, which I'm not going specifically into the equations, but knowing one of those parameters, you should be able to express the other. And frequency, the photon energy is expressed in terms of electron volts, and frequency is expressed in terms of hertz, and the frequency is the number of oscillations per second. Here you see the waves, these are the number of the oscillations per second. And wavelength is the distance between these two peaks. So the frequency and wavelength are inversely related. So in medical imaging, what we are doing is we are using these various types of energies to create images of the interior of the body non-invasively. Non-invasively means you're not cutting the body. So these are some invisible rays that enter the body and penetrate the body, and you have a detector that captures those penetrated signals. So what are the requirements for creating these medical images? So we have to use the energy that must be able to penetrate the human body. So it has to penetrate and it has to be collected at the detector to form the image. And the second property is it has to interact with the internal body structures, so that different anatomies or different structures would create different contrasts on the images so that you can see the differentiation. And if you come back to your electromagnetic spectrum, the types of radiation that have these satisfy both these properties are the X-rays and the gamma rays and the radio waves. So these are the primary imaging modalities that are being used in the hospital. So I'm going to cover basically these today's lecture. So now just to reiterate, I talked about we can use X-rays. So using X-rays, we have two types of modalities that are commonly used in hospitals. That is the radiography and the computed tomography. And I'll go over each of those in the next slides. But again, X-rays come from these high energy spectrum with a very high energy associated with them. And they are expressed in terms of energy. And you have gamma rays, which are also belong to this high energy. And these rays are used in radionuclide imaging, which I'll also go deeper in the next slides. And the third type of radiation is radio waves, so which is used in MRI, which is magnetic resonance imaging. And the last one, the sound waves, these are not part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Sound waves are basically mechanical waves, but these can also be used to produce images. We know like below 20 kilohertz is the audible range for us, but we can use the frequencies that are above 20 kilohertz, which are in the ultrasound range, for acquiring or for capturing images of the body. And this, I'm just showing the timeline of these different medical imaging modalities, which I just showed you. So it starts with the radiography, that's the earliest discovery. And then we have the angiography, that is the visualization of blood vessels. And we have the ultrasound, and then the nuclear medicine. We have the CT, and towards the end, MRI. And recently we have these hybrid systems, which I'll also talk in the later slides. Okay, so let's dive into X-ray radiography. And as you all must be knowing, this is the most widely used imaging tool in the hospitals or in the clinics. So you often go to dental examinations where the dentist actually acquires some images of your teeth. So what is the X-rays are the ones that are being used to capture these images, to see if there is any tooth decay or if your teeth are properly aligned or so. And the second major application of X-ray radiography is to see if there are any broken bones. So if you get injured, if you go to an orthopedic clinic, the first thing they ask you to get is to get an X-ray to see if there is a break or not. And also X-rays are used for chest chest X-ray, so to see if there are any abdominal mass or if the lungs are filled with fluid like pneumonia. And that is the first choice of modality that's being used in the hospitals. So again, X-rays, they have no mass, no charge. It's a form of electromagnetic energy and it travels at the speed of light. And the energy, it's very high, it's between 20 to 150 kilo electron volts. So X-rays are discovered by Roentgen in 1895 and he won Nobel Prize for that. And it's the first medical imaging technology. And here, this is the radiograph of his wife's hand. That's the first image that he acquired. So in radiography, we have an X-ray source and a detector. And radiography is the projection of a 2D image of the 3D object. So we have this subject which is 3D, right? But the image what we acquire is only 2D. So what happens is these X-rays, they penetrate the body and different tissues have different densities. And depending upon the densities, the X-rays are attenuated by the body. And whatever that's left, it's transmitted, is collected at the detector and the image is formed here. So again, this is having different tissue types. Here you see bone, here this is air, this is tissue, and this shows the X-ray intensity. And as we know, bone is very dense, so it attenuates most of the X-rays, and the transmitted one you see have low intensity compared to the air or other tissues. Similarly, air has low density and most of the X-rays are transmitted and you see high intensity on the film. So this is your X-ray machine. As I said, the X-rays are penetrated and they form image here. And this is your radiograph. As I said, the bone, it indicates dense parts because it attenuates most of the signal and it gives white color on the X-ray radiographs, whereas gray indicates less dense that are something like lungs, where it's mostly filled with air and it has low density, so it appears dark on X-ray radiography. And this is a typical X-ray machine. So you have an X-ray generator and this is the object, and here underneath you have the X-ray detector, and after the beam is incident, you can instantly collect the images on this radiograph. And here it shows the patient has a broken arm. So X-rays are not something that are naturally occurring. We have to first produce them. So X-rays are produced in an X-ray tube. And this X-ray tube is maintained at a very high potential so as to generate very high energetic electrons. So this is the X-ray tube. It has a cathode and it has an anode. So you maintain this X-ray tube at a very high potential. So this is here you have a potential energy, and as these electrons are accelerated towards the anode, the potential energy will be converted into kinetic energy. And these electrons will bombard with the material here, and this is a tungsten material which has a high density. And as the electrons bombard the tungsten, it interacts with either the nucleus or the electrons of the tungsten and causes X radiation. So this kinetic energy is basically converted into X-rays of high energy. So that is just how the X-rays are produced and how the images are formed. But there are again limitations with the X-ray radiography. As I told, it's an overlap of all the structures. So you basically lose the depth information, and all the bone and all these structures are pretty much overlapped. So you see very poor soft tissue contrast. You only see the bones, but really not any organs within your thorax or the abdomen. And also it cannot be used to quantify any densities low. So each pixel, it doesn't represent anything because it's the overlap of all those pixels. So the next latest advancement of this X-ray radiography is computed tomography. So as I told, this is the radiography. But in case of computed tomography, it also uses X-rays, but it produces images of thin slice. So here you can see, this is again from the abdomen. So here it shows the liver, the stomach, intestines, and so on. And it's very clear, the contrast, what you see here. And this modality, it eliminates all the overlapping and it permits like quantitative measures. So you can measure what is the intensity of your liver, of your stomach, and so on. And as you see, it produces a high sensitivity to both to soft tissue. So you can differentiate your liver from your stomach. And in diagnostic imaging, we usually call different anatomical planes. So images, when the radiologist or the clinician sees the images, they typically see in 3 different planes. So these are the coronal, let me start with axial. So axial is when you cut the body into top and bottom, and you see it from the top. So you're seeing from here. And coronal is when you're dividing the body into front and back. So it's basically the face you're seeing. And sagittal is you're dividing the plane into left and right. So it's the sideways you're seeing. So with the CT, you can have these 3 different visualizations, which wasn't possible with X-ray radiography. So this is the axial, you're seeing from the top, and this is the coronal, this is the front, and this is the sagittal from the side. And if you can recognize, I just labeled different organs. So this is your liver. It's also seen on the sagittal. And here, this is the kidney, and you have, as it is sagittal, you only see 1 kidney. But if you go to axial, you can see these are both kidneys. And this is your stomach. And these are the intestines. And above the liver is the heart. And this is your spine or the vertebral column. Okay, so what is different with this computed tomography? So tomography just means image of slice, and here you're using complex reconstruction algorithms that requires a lot of computation to acquire or to reconstruct these images in these 2D planes. So again, this is comparison with the radiography where everything is overlapped. In CT, you can see the slices are very thin and you can appreciate all the anatomy here. So how is this possible? So in computed tomography, what you're doing is you're having a collimator here. And this collimator, it narrows the X-ray beam. So this is your object of interest, and you're only exciting or you're only incidenting the X-rays at this slice. So you're using a thin collimator that only allows a thin beam of X-rays to pass, and this slice gets the X-rays pass through the slice, and the signal is detected by this X-ray detector. And this technique was invented by Hounsfield in 1972 at a company in England. And again, he received Nobel Prize for this greatest invention. So this is a typical CT scanner. So this is how it looks like when you go to the hospital. And this is called the gantry. So the gantry has an X-ray tube, and it has an array of detectors. And this gantry would rotate around the patient to collect images at different angles so as to produce the final 2D image. And all this information is sent to a data acquisition system and then a computer to finally display the images at the console. And this is what is within the CT gantry. So this is your tube. This is again the array of detectors, and this is the X-ray beam. And that is the regular CT. Like the traditional way is in one X-ray rotation, or one time the X-ray tube rotates, you are able to capture only one slice. And then you have to move the patient table to acquire the next slice, and so on. But this process is slow. So what they later on did is they moved the table continuously as data is acquired, because in realistic, like if you're only acquiring the projections for 180 degrees, so only half rotation, and the other half rotation is just spent, it's just wasted. So what you're right now doing is you're moving your table continuously, so that in 180 degrees, the first slice is obtained. Again, as it goes back to its normal position, the other slice is obtained. And if you think of that, then your X-ray beam would follow like a helical path. And this has greatly reduced the time of X-rays, of X-ray imaging or the CT imaging. And this made possible 3D image acquisition within a single breath hold. And another advancement that was made is, as I told, usually a single slice was acquired for one rotation. But with the multi-slice detectors, now instead of one array of detectors, you have 2D array of detectors. So you have multiple detectors that are lined up. So you can simultaneously excite, you can use a wide X-ray beam instead of a narrow beam. And you can excite multiple slices, and the signal that are received for each of these detectors would be specific to this slice. And this also, it covers larger volumes with this multi-slice detector, and it shortens the scan time. And this is back, but this is old, but this it had like increased or decreased the acquisition time by 8 times. But nowadays you have more like 256 or 320 detectors that would greatly reduce your acquisition time to sub-seconds. And one more advantage with CT compared to X-ray is these numbers are quantitative numbers. So the gray levels on these images represent the attenuation that are acquired in each pixel. And these gray levels are expressed in terms of Hounsfield units. And this is the formula that's used to calculate those Hounsfield units. And what it is basically doing is taking the Hounsfield unit of water as 0. And then it's calculating the Hounsfield units with respect to the water. So you have water 0, and minus 1000 is supposed to be air. And if you have positive, it is bone. And any other intermediate have between 0 and air. So this basically gives like a quantitative number for if you're interested in segmenting maybe liver or so. These numbers are very useful to automate the segmentation. Okay, so these are some clinical applications of CT. It's the most commonly used modality for head because it's very fast, and it's mainly used for trauma or like stroke, hemorrhage, and if there are any tumors. Here this shows, this is a CT image acquired from a subject who has undergone an accident. So this area, if you see, this is showing the blood perfusion maps, or you can call it as like blood flow maps. As you see here, this tissue is not receiving the blood flow. So it's actually kind of dead or infarcted. So it helps us to see which parts of the brain are infarcted and to provide treatment to those parts. And other body applications are for seeing if there are any lesions. So this is again liver showing lesions, and this is a heart CT. And you can see like there is severe right coronary artery here, lesion here, which I think is evident on the 3D model. So you acquire all these 2D images and you can create like a 3D model to see how it looks like. And this is again, it's the CT can also be used for radiation treatment planning. So in this case, this is like a tumor, and if you want to avoid, if you want to only prescribe the radiation treatment to this one, you need to know the margins. So CT can be used to know what are the margins that have to be given so that the radiation therapy is not given to other organs. And also for biopsy guiding, if you want to cut out like a tumor sample, so it helps to guide the biopsy to cut the abnormal tissue instead of other tissues. And this is again showing the angiography through the thighs and the legs. And here you can see again the angiography, that is these are all the vessels, the arteries of reaching the kidneys and other abdominal organs. Okay, I don't think I have time for this, but I can play this towards the end if we have time. But it is just summarizing how CT works. I can share this link if you want to watch it later on. Oops. Okay, so that's about CT. Now let's go on to the next modality, that is radionuclide imaging. So in contrast to the CT or X-ray radiography, in radionuclide imaging, you're actually measuring the biochemical or physiological function of a certain region. So in this case, for example, you do not see like the bones or any other organs, but you see just the metabolic activity here. So in this case, you're only producing functional information. And what is the energy source that is used? Here we use radionuclides. Again, what are radionuclides? So these are atoms with unstable nucleus, and they undergo spontaneous disintegration with emission of energy, either alpha, beta, or gamma. And in our case, we are interested in the gamma rays. So why gamma rays? Because alpha and beta rays, they cannot penetrate the body. If we again go back to our first principle, the rays should penetrate the body and reach the detector. So the gamma rays are the only ones that can penetrate the body. And the desired energy range is between 70 to 511 kilo electron volts that will be used. And another important property of choosing what radionuclides to use is half-life. Again, half-life is the time taken for the radioactive substance to disintegrate to half of its amount. So so when the patient comes in, you inject the radionuclide and you want it to have a half-life that is not too long or too short. And the typical half-life that is preferred is between minutes to hours. So that if it is too short, then your detector cannot capture, it emits before the detector captures. And if it is too long, you have to scan them over a longer period of time. And technetium-99 is the most widely used radionuclide, and it has a half-life about 6 hours, which is optimal for the functional imaging. So again, these radionuclides, these are not naturally, we have some natural radioactive isotopes, but these cannot be used because they have long half-lives and they emit alpha or beta particles. So we have to generate the radionuclides that produce gamma rays and that have the half-life that we want. And for that, what we do is we bombard these stable isotopes with high energy photons like neutrons and make them unstable. And after they are injected, they slowly disintegrate and emit gamma rays. And so these radionuclides should also be bounded to some pharmaceuticals because they have to tag some part of the body, and we are interested in seeing the function of that. So this is the radionuclide, and we usually link this radionuclide to some metabolite that is of interest, which you know it's going to surely attach to the tissue of interest. For example, this is the cancer cell, and it has a target protein. So you know this molecule will bind to this. So what you do is you attach this radionuclide to the target molecule that of interest and then perform the imaging. So in case of, again, as I said, technetium-99 is the widely used one. So you, depending upon the application, you tag to different molecules. For example, for heart perfusion, you tag to one molecule, and for brain, you tag to a different molecule. And this again shows these are the heart maps, and this is the brain map with like showing the radioactivity produced by these radiopharmaceuticals. Okay, just to reiterate, so what's happening in nuclear medicine? We are administering a radiopharmaceutical intravenously, and this radiopharmaceutical concentrates in the desired locations, and the nucleus decays to emit gamma rays. And these gamma rays we are capturing using a gamma camera. And this is typically how the gamma camera looks like. So we have a, so this is the radionuclide that is injected. It emits gamma rays, and these gamma rays are incident on the image crystal, where the gamma rays are converted to light energy. And this light energy is converted to, again, eventually into electrical energy that's recorded on the computer, and the image is displayed on here. And there are three different modalities in nuclear medicine. The first one is the planar scintigraphy, and this is very similar to the X-ray radiography. So it again produces a 2D image of a 3D object. So you're basically losing depth information here. And this is how the Centigraphy machine looks like. And as I said, you have something like a fixed detector system, and you only are measuring signals that are coming from here. So whatever you're acquiring is from the entire bodies, and you don't know at what depth it is coming from. And this is the most widely used for whole body screening, because it's very quick. You can see if there are any lesions or so for the patient. And another advanced imaging modality is called Spect, which is single photon emission computed tomography. This is again very similar to X-ray computed tomography, which we just talked about. So instead of so here we are producing 2D images instead of the overlap of the 3D projection. So you're producing series of continuous 2D images, and it also has like a gantry. So these are the detectors, and it continuously records the activity by capturing projections from different angles. So you capture projections from different angles, and then you can reconstruct your images with different image reconstruction algorithms. So as I said, it's very similar to CT, but in this case, you're using radionuclide as your energy source. And some Spect clinical applications are, it's primarily used for myocardial perfusion, that is heart perfusion. So in this case, this is heart, and you see there is some stenosis here, there's some blockage, and you see the blood flow is not reached towards the bottom of the heart. And this is this can be seen here. So you see this is less bright compared to the other images above. And the other application is brain perfusion. So this is the perfusion in case of normal subject, and this is in case of a patient with Alzheimer's. So as you see in Alzheimer's, the neurons keep dying, and you see that there's reduced perfusion, indicating that there is no neural activity here. Okay, so the last one under radionuclide imaging is PET. PET stands for positron emission tomography, and this uses a different radio tracer compared to Spect. And this tracer, it doesn't emit gamma rays, but it emits positrons. And these positrons are, if you know, these are analogous to the electrons. So these positrons, what they do is they combine with the electrons in the nearby tissue, and then they annihilate two gamma rays in the opposite direction that are 180 degrees apart. And this happens simultaneously. And now you have a detector to capture these simultaneous events. So you time when they're acquired, and because of this timing, this is very sensitive compared to Spect. In Spect, you're acquiring all the photon, whatever those are reaching the detectors, you're capturing those signals. Whereas PET, it is very specific. So only if it captures gamma rays that are 180 degrees apart, then only the incident is recorded. So it's very specific. And this is again, as I said, it uses a different type of radionuclide. So these are generated and injected and again scanned, and this is how your PET image looks like. And PET has this slightly different clinical applications. It's primarily used for oncological or cancer imaging, because if we go back in PET, this is F18FDG is the fluorodeoxyglucose. So we know that in cancer, the cancer cells take a lot of glucose. So what you are doing is we are attaching the fluorine, the radioactive fluorine to a glucose molecule, and you're then seeing which regions are taking more of these radio tracer. That shows that there is some abnormality going on there. For example, in this case, here it shows a very high activity. So, this is showing that the patient had an esophageal cancer. And again, here, this is the lung. And you see there is lung cancer. And this is again from the thyroid, showing that the patient has thyroid cancer. PET can also be used for other neurological disorders. And compared to Spect, now PET is imaging, or it's producing the metabolism maps instead of compared to Spect. So this is basically showing like the glucose maps, how much amount of glucose your brain is taking. And this is again can be used in other applications like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease. So again, some take home for radionuclide imaging. It provides unique functional information, and it complements CT and MRI that produce structural information. And it has very high sensitivity, and as it can detect nanograms of the injected radio tracer. And it has very high specificity because whatever you're collecting the signal is not natural. So whatever it's being accumulated, that's where you're getting the signal from. And some limitations are, as you see here, the signal is poor, and you have very low spatial resolution compared to the CT or MRI. And also the image acquisition is very long or very slow compared to CT. Okay, so to conclude the X-rays and gamma rays, I just want to highlight that both X-rays and gamma rays are ionizing radiation. So in the spectrum, if you see, this is ionizing part and this is non-ionizing part. And ionizing radiation is something where the radiation has enough energy to detach electrons from atoms. Whereas in case of non-ionizing radiation like MRI, it doesn't cause removal of electrons. So what basically the ionizing radiation is doing is it can break bonds and it can damage your DNA. So it's not something that's that should be used frequently. Only when there is necessity to be used, then you have to use it, especially for pediatrics. Okay, so let's move to the next modality, that's the ultrasound. And this is the image, this is the fetus image of in the mother's womb. So this is the baby in the mother's womb. And your parents must have seen first when you're in the womb using this ultrasound imaging. And here you see the heart showing that the baby's heart is beating. So ultrasound, as I mentioned, it uses high frequency sound waves that are over 20 kilohertz. And you place a transducer. So this is again an example. This is the mother's womb with the fetus, and this is your transducer. And this transducer produces sound waves, and these sound waves enter the body and they reflect back at the tissue interface. So whenever there are two tissue interfaces, then it kind of reflects back, and whatever that is reflected back, you're capturing as a signal and producing the image. And how are these ultrasound waves generated? So in this transducer, you have a piezoelectric crystal where you're supplying electrical energy, and this crystal oscillates and it produces ultrasound waves. And as I said, these waves travel through the tissue and they're reflected at the interface. And what you're basically capturing in ultrasound is the time taken to acquire those images back. So the time taken to get the reflected images back. And from the time you can calculate the distance, and from the distance you can calculate the depth from which you're getting the signal. So this is ultrasound. As I said, it's used mainly for fetal imaging and also producing real-time 4D images. And also it can be used for echocardiogram to check the function of the heart, whether all the chambers are working fine, and the colors here resemble the flow of the blood. So one is going the opposite way. So the red and the blue signifies the opposite ways how the blood is flowing through the heart. And also for abdominal organs, if there are any lesions, you can use microbubbles, which are contrast agents, to depict the focal lesions here. And also like the renal stones, you can use ultrasound to see if there are any renal stones or kidney stones. So some advantages of ultrasound are it doesn't use any ionizing radiation, so it's very safe. And it's portable. So unlike all the rest of the modalities, what I'm covering today, this is portable. So it can be moved from room to room. Whereas all the other modalities, they are stationed in that particular room. And it's of low cost. And as I said, it is safe for pregnant women. And some limitations are you cannot image bone or intestinal tract. So as you see, each of these modalities have specific clinical applications. So bone is evident more on X-rays or CTs, whereas ultrasound, it's not for bones. It's more for soft tissue. And it's also limited in patients who are obese. And one more thing is it depends on the operator's skill, how well they can place the transducer and collect the images. Okay, so coming to our last part, which is magnetic resonance imaging, and which is also my area of interest. So just brief, so what are we imaging in MRI? We are actually imaging the hydrogen protons in MRI. So we know our body has about 65% of water. And we are actually, and these hydrogen protons, they produce the strong MRI signal that we are able to form the images, as I show in the next slides. So what does an MRI scanner have? It has a very powerful magnet. It's a superconducting magnet, and the field strength is between 0.5 or 4 Tesla that is being used clinically. And when you compare to the Earth's magnetic field, this is about 10,000 times more than the Earth's magnetic field. So you can imagine how powerful the magnet is. And as I said, we use radio waves here to excite our water protons. And let me play this because MRI, I think I didn't accept the share sound, I think. Let me, give me a second, please. Okay, I hope you're able to hear.
MRIs use protons, which are abundant in the human body. All protons spin, creating a small magnetic charge. When a strong magnetic field is introduced, as is the case in an MRI machine, the protons align with that field. The MRI technician then introduces a radio frequency pulse that disrupts the proton and forces it either into a 90-degree or 180-degree realignment with the static magnetic field. Since the radio frequency pulse pushed the proton against its nature, once this pulse is turned off, the protons realign with that magnetic field, releasing electromagnetic energy along the way. The MRI is able to detect this energy and is able to differentiate various tissues based on how quickly they release energy after the pulse is turned off.
Okay, so I just wanted to show the video because it's the visual way of seeing helps a lot with MRI. It's not an easy or straightforward technique, I should say, compared to the other modalities. So MRI uses nuclear magnetic resonance phenomena. So what you're first having is you're having hydrogen protons that have some net spin, and they act as tiny magnets. So these are randomly oriented. But once when the patient is put in the MRI scanner, these protons either align parallel or anti-parallel to this field. And they not only align, but they actually precess around this magnetic field with certain frequency. So what we are now doing is we're applying radio frequency waves that match this frequency, and you're creating a resonance effect. And these protons are excited to the higher energy state. And then after the RF excitation is removed, radio waves are emitted back, and that's what you're collecting the signal. You have antennas to collect this signal and produce the image. So this is your MRI scanner, and I have a small one here. So here, this is the magnetic bore, and you have a strong magnet, you have gradient coils, and you have an RF coil that transmits and receives this radio frequency energy. And whatever energy that is received is processed, and finally the image is produced. And how the spatial localization, or how you're picking a single pixel is different in MRI. So in MRI, we actually apply different gradients. So for example, as I told, depending upon the amount of magnetic field, the hydrogen protons resonate at a different frequency. So you're applying a gradient so that you can differentiate the slow moving protons from the fast moving protons. And by this, you can also kind of spatially localize from where the signal is coming from. So in this case, you're applying a gradient field along slice direction. So you're now exciting the single slice. And you're applying two more gradients along frequency and phase encoding. So if you see here along the X direction, these have different frequencies. And from these different frequencies, you know from which location it's coming from. Similarly, these have different phases. And from the phase information, you can tell from which location it's coming from. So these gradients are used for locating from which pixel or from which point your signal is coming from. And as I said, MRI is very, the radio waves are safe to the patient, but one thing to keep in mind is the magnetic fields are huge. As I said, it is more than 10,000 times the Earth's magnetic field. So you shouldn't be carrying any magnetic material into an MRI scanner. And I think you have this sign big on the, before you enter the room, that the magnet is always on. So it's always powerful. So you usually are pre-screened before entering the MRI scanner room to make sure there are no magnetic materials. Because as you see here, all these are magnetic materials, and these are pulled like thousands of lbs force and are attached to the MRI scanner, and these cannot be retrieved back. And the magnet has to be kind of destroyed if you want to take this apart. So it's a very strong magnetic field, and I'll post this video in the chat if you want to see how powerful it is. I don't know how much time I'm, okay, I'll speed up. So some limitations are the image acquisition is slower than CT and ultrasound. So it takes about 30 to 40 minutes, whereas CT it's in less than 10 minutes. But your patients are often given video goggles to watch movies during MRI sessions. And it's also noisy, so you're provided with headphones. And the patients with metallic implants, the implants would destroy the MRI signal, so it's not good in patients who have some implants. So some advantages, as I said, it's safe as ultrasound. And it produces excellent soft tissue contrast. Here you see the brain, the gray matter, white matter, the cerebellum, the cerebrum, and the brainstem. So it produces a very high soft tissue contrast. And it also produces real-time images of the beating heart. and the images can be acquired in any other plane. So these are some advanced MRI techniques that I'm just showing to know the capability of MRI. So you can again acquire like the blood vessels, perfusion, and these are the nerve axon tracts. You can also acquire or you can also produce maps of your nerves. And like spectroscopy, you can measure the metabolites. And this is called something functional MRI, where you can also record the activity of your brain. So not only the information, you can, for if you're doing certain tasks, you can see which parts of your brain are activated. So this is a very cool picture. I thought you'd be interested. So this is from MIT, and here they're showing that in the baby that is 4-month-old, that as the mother is showing affection, what regions are activated at that young age. This is the greatest advancement, I would say, in MRI. And with as you go the higher and higher field, you can produce a very high resolution images in the order of microns. So you can appreciate here the level of detail. You can see the veins, the arteries here. So lastly, I'll just talk. So we also have hybrid imaging, where you're combining the functional and anatomical, like PET-CT. PET produces functional information, CT produces anatomical. So you're combining this into one scanner so that you can produce both images and you can fuse them together. So this is the CT, this is the PET, and this is the PET-CT, which is giving both anatomical and functional information. And similarly with PET-MR. And finally, in our lab, we do quantitative MRI. As I said, we measure iron and fat quantification, primarily in the liver. We do lots of simulations. We build phantoms. Also, we measure the amount of iron and fat in the liver. So this is example from a patient. So this is the liver, and we can also non-invasively measure how much amount of fat is in the liver or is in other organs. And this is actually the histology confirmation. And we're also working on automating some brain volume segmentation to correlate with some neurocognitive functions. And we also do quantitative NMR, where we measure the lipid metabolites like cholesterol, triglycerides, omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids from biological tissue samples. So final take-home messages. The medical imaging uses a variety of energy types to create images that are distinct. And you have modalities that uses ionizing radiations like X-ray and gamma rays, and non-ionizing radiation like ultrasound and MRI. And anatomical information is primarily provided by CT, MRI, whereas functional is provided by PET and the nuclear medicine images. Okay, so I think I'm done. There's a poll. If you want to take part, so this is anonymous, so feel free to just select whatever answer you think is right. So we don't know what you answered. Okay, so let me launch it. Can you see it? Okay. So there are, I think, 6 questions. So I didn't make it a lot, but I thought at least these are the main highlights or take-home points from this seminar. And as you answer this, I'm ready for any questions. See, most of the questions are answered. If they are not answered, please feel free to raise the hand or post it again. Each modality is like an ocean. I tried to give like only the superficial view, and sorry, I was, I think, rushing so that I can deliver all the information. But I have some resources that I can share with you if you're interested to know more about any of these modalities.
If you want to, you can either paste them in a chat, or if you want to just email them to me, I can send it out to the full list that registered.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll send it to you.
Are you going to send the chat website that was up there? I asked a question. Okay.
And any students, high school or so, who, if you're interested in MRI or any of the projects we are doing, you can contact Dr. Ivy or reach out to me. My email address is on the website. If you want to shadow or look like what kind of projects we do, we are happy to welcome you. So I think I'll probably tell the correct answers. I don't know the way to send you the correct answers. Maybe I'll also, with the resources, I can send you the correct answers. But for the first one, it's just the experience. So 79% of you have undergone an X-ray and CT, and see it's spread. So for the second question, so we are talking about X-ray measurements that are taken from different directions. So X-rays are used in CT scan. So ultrasound uses ultrasound imaging, ultrasound waves, sorry. So CT scan is the one that uses X-rays. So for the second one, CT scan is correct. MRI uses radio waves. So for the third question, the application of radioactive substances. So as I said, the radioactive substances are used in nuclear medicine. So as the name suggests, in nuclear medicines, you use radioactive substances. And MRI uses radio waves, as I said, CT and X-ray, they use X-rays. Ultrasound waves are not audible to human beings. Those are above 20 kilohertz. That's the reason we say it ultrasound. So those are inaudible to human beings. And some species like bats also can hear to some extent. So for the fifth question, which allows us to see images with a powerful magnet. So as I said, MRI, in the name, it's magnetic resonance imaging. This uses a powerful magnet that helps to get signal from the protons of your body. So for the last one, yes, so all of these are metallic, so they can be magnetized, so they cannot enter a MRI suite. So the answer is none of the above. And I'm also, so I'm posting different resources, but Dr. Ivy also will be sending it to you. And there is this quiz at this website, which I thought is fun. I mean, it's again very at basic level, but it has some MRI questions and some matching the images to the correct imaging modalities. So if you're interested in just trying it out. So I'm ending poll. There's also share results. So I think now the red shows the correct answers. So any questions?
I have one timeline question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the person that checked everything off on the first one.
Oh.
I've had cancer and joint replacements and brain surgery for a variety of reasons. Way back 42 years ago, how accurate was the pinpointing of the radiation to destroy cancer cells?
No, not very accurate.
I didn't think so.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
That's
I lost.
Question, but it's important now.
Yeah. I mean, I see. Actually, the motivation for me to take this field is I lost my father because of cancer. So at that time, there was no like imaging that could detect it. But right now, with all these nuclear medicine, we can get the functional information and can detect at much earlier stages.
That's good. It does work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much. It was great to see so many people on here today. I'm excited that we had such a great turnout. So thank you again. And as I mentioned, we've recorded this session.